Gentleman will state her parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Chairman, when can we anticipate a response to our November letter requesting certain individual witnesses?
I don't know if this page is going to get blocked.
The gentlewoman should be aware
that the
witnesses, the minority listed are scheduled for next week.
Those were your witnesses, Mr. Chairman. What about the additional 6 witnesses?
Gentlewoman may inquire
before we get blocked
witnesses or make a request for vote on additional witnesses following the witness testimony.
And Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order under HRES 660.
660.
Will state her point of order.
Mr. Chairman, will you be prohibiting witnesses from answering members' questions as you have in the closed door depositions?
You damn right he is. If it's a Republican witness,
which I was.
For some of them, yes.
Correct.
The only times I prevented witnesses from answering questions, along with their counsel, was when it was apparent that members were seeking to out the whistleblower. We will do everything necessary to protect the whistleblower's identity.
But he can out everybody else. Ain't that a bitch?
Members of the committee who have in the past voiced strong support for whistleblower protections seek to undermine those protections by outing the whistleblower.
Mr. Chairman, only one member and their staff on this committee has direct knowledge of the identity of the whistleblower.
Will suspend. You asked a parliamentary inquiry and I am responding. Or a point of order, I'm responding.
Shit look like he's on crack.
We will not permit the outing of the whistleblower, and questions along those lines, counsel will inform their clients not to respond to. If necessary, I will intervene. Otherwise, I want members to feel free to ask any questions they like.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion.
I'm sorry. This is an opportunity for members.
What up, J.A.? I just tried this on a new channel.
It's not recognized. Mr. Chairman, I'm responding to the gentlewoman's point of order. Otherwise,
look at Adam Schiff. Look like he's on suicide crack.
Mr. Conway, do you seek recognition for what
purpose? I'm testing out. I'll probably go to my real channel.
Actually, subpoena the whistleblower for a closed door, secret deposition, so that the questions that should be appropriately asked the whistleblower by our side and your side may be asked. And I would prefer that rather than it be your single decision, that the committee speak to that issue rather than just the chairman.
Oh, well, I can't get the damn channel.
I think the gentleman, it won't be my single
decision. The whistleblower.
The whistleblower.
My single decision. We will entertain a motion to subpoena any witness, but after the.
I probably gotta get off this channel and go to my main channel.
Will be in order. That motion will be suspended.
I dropped the link.
Mr. Chairman, do you anticipate when we would vote?
What purpose does Mr. Jordan seek recognition?
I dropped the link.
Clarifying question: do you anticipate when we might vote on the ability to have the whistleblower?
What the hell wrong with this? I'm not getting.
The 435 members of Congress, you are the only member who knows who that individual is, and your staff is the only staff.
Get him, Jordan. Why ain't nobody
with that individual? We would like that opportunity. When might that happen in this proceeding today?
Oh,
as the gentleman knows, that's a false statement. I do not know the identity of the whistleblower, and I'm determined to make sure
you a damn lie. His ass don't get arrested if he lied.
You will have an opportunity after the witnesses testify to make a
his ass getting arrested if he lied.
Compel a vote.
Look at his eyes.
And with that,
oh my God!
Now recognize the witnesses. Before I do, I want to just emphasize the microphones are sensitive, so please go directly into them.
Try something new to Trim Smith.
Statements will be made part of the record. And with that, Deputy Assistant Secretary Kent, you are recognized for your opening statement. Ambassador Taylor, you were recognized immediately thereafter for your opening statement.
Let's hear these opening statements. See if your ass get locked up.
My name is George Kent, and I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. I have served proudly as a nonpartisan career Foreign Service officer for more than 27 years under 5 presidents, 3 Republican and 2 Democrat.
Oh,
as I mentioned in my opening comments last month in the closed door deposition, I represent the 3rd generation of my family who have chosen a career in public service and sworn the oath of office that all U.S. public servants do in defense of our Constitution. Indeed, there has been a George Kent sworn to defend the Constitution continuously for nearly 60 years.
I like his tie, though.
Ever since
his bow tie and his handkerchief is on point.
Summer. After graduating first in his Naval Academy class in 1965, the year best known for his Heisman-winning classmate Roger Staubach, my father served a full honorable 30 years, including as a captain of a nuclear ballistic missile submarine during the height of the Cold War.
What the hell would this got to do with the Donald Trump? Get on with the shit. We don't want to hear about your life story.
In particular,
Look at her in the back. Her hair is fucked up. Look, she didn't even do her shit. She been up all night. She ain't had a cup of coffee or nothing. Look at her. Look, she ain't had a cup of coffee or nothing.
Japanese prisoner.
But her shit is fucked up.
He returned to service as an Air Force judge advocate, upholding the rule of law until his death in 1965. Today, I appear before you once again, under subpoena, as a fact witness.
Why is he talking about his dad? Yeah, why is he talking about his dad? Who the fuck gives a fuck about your daddy?
Examined in this inquiry, to the best of my ability and recollection, subject to the limits placed on me by the law and this process. I will begin with some opening comments on the key principles at the heart.
He better tell the truth, his ass under oath.
To wit, principled public service and
Trump 2020, you damn right.
Interests and the place of Ukraine in our national and security
interests. Yes, in the left corner or right here.
For the past 5 years, we have focused our united efforts across the Atlantic to support Ukraine in its fight for the cause of freedom and the rebirth of a country.
She with business.
And the warped legacy of Soviet institutions and post-Soviet behavior. As I stated in my closed-door deposition last month, you don't step into the public arena of international diplomacy in active pursuit of principled U.S. interests without expecting vigorous pushback, including personal attacks. Such attacks came from the Russians, their proxies.
I need to hear what he's gonna say. Y'all know who Mr. King is, right? Y'all know what he's gonna talk about, right?
It was unexpected and most
let me see if I can get this.
To watch some Americans,
let me see if I can get
including those who allied themselves with corrupt Ukrainians in pursuit of private agendas, launch attacks on dedicated public servants advancing U.S. interests in Ukraine.
Y'all know who Mr. King gonna talk about.
Those attacks undermine
Mr. Kent is the person that was on. No, Mr. Kent was the person that was mad that he fired Maria Yanovich.
At stake in Ukraine.
He was the dude that was mad at that.
Is very much in our national interest, in the way we have defined our national interest broadly in Europe for the past 75 years.
The city robbers never learned tricks up for kids. America first, you damn right, America first. Why the fuck are we so worried about Ukraine? Why is Ukraine having the power to change our whole motherfucking constitution, laws, and presidential election? Think about that, little ass Ukraine.
Notwithstanding the shadow of the Iron Curtain. Europe's security and
Rose Weber president.
contributed to our
like and said, my good man. Trump did nothing wrong. He didn't.
Success also fits squarely into our strategy.
They know he didn't do nothing wrong.
Since the fall of the wall 30 years ago this past week. A Europe truly whole, free, and at peace.
What's up, Nisha?
Our strategic aim for the entirety of my foreign service career.
I'm gonna have to call you, Nisha. You're gonna have to call me so we can get these Donald Trump shirts ready. I got these brand new Donald Trump ideas ready. You're gonna have to call me so we can get it in. I'm having you need to talk to my girl.
Represented by the red in the map.
Ukraine is corrupt.
Looking forward,
Mexico? Damn. And Mexico is corrupt. That's saying something.
Strategic challenge now before us. Great power competition. With rivals such as
exactly. Next time somebody get on there, I'll say once upon a time, huh? Once upon a time when I was a little boy, but this shit is supposed to be a hearing. What I'm hearing is some bullshit.
War in Eastern Europe since 2014, and its broader.
What the fuck is? He done went on to a war in 1963.
Political challenges now facing the United States.
What the fuck is going on?
Ukraine's popular revolution of dignity in 2014.
This is a history lesson.
Corrupt.
Haitian American for Trump 2020. That's right. Haitians in the house. All the friends are moving to New Zealand. His recent gun ban.
Occupying 7% of its territory, roughly equivalent to the size of Texas, the United States. At that time, Ukraine's state institutions were on the verge of collapse.
What?
Ukrainian civil society answered the challenge. They formed volunteer battalions of citizens, including.
What do this? Is he gonna say Ukraine whole history now?
Funding for their own weapons. Body armor.
What the fuck is? Oh, MG.
They were the 21st century Ukrainian equivalent of our own.
What the hell is wrong with our society?
Buying time for a regular army to reconstitute. Since then, more than 13,000 Ukrainians have died on Ukrainian soil defending their.
Why are you not talking about how many Americans died? Oh, this nigga done brought a book. Hold on. This motherfucker done brought a book.
War of independence.
You mean this nigga done turned the page?
By analogy, the American colonies may not have prevailed against the British imperial might, without the help of transatlantic friends after 1776. In an echo of Lafayette's organized assistance
oh my God, he done lost me on 1976. I don't know what the fuck he talking about after he said 1976. Or before he said 1976.
Past 5 years in desperately needed trained and equipped security assistance to Ukraine. These funds increase Ukraine's strength and ability to fight.
Hold on, I know something I can do. Hold on.
Ultimately, Ukraine
I know what something we can do.
To become a full security.
Why he talking? Hold on, I know something we can do.
NATO.
Nobody feel like he can't
Similar to von Steuben training colonials at Valley Forge, U.S. and NATO allied trainers developed the skills of Ukrainian units at Yavoriv near the Polish border and elsewhere. They helped rewrite military education for Ukraine's next generation, as von Steuben did for America's first.
Von Stupid? Who the fuck is Von Stupid?
Resistance to Russian aggression. We have a front row seat to the Russian way of war in the 21st century, gaining priceless insights that contribute to our own security.
Who is the?
This year in 2019.
Who is this in the bow tie? This is Mr. Kent. He's supposed to be one of the people that's testifying today. He's supposed to have any information. Put in one in the chat if you remember who Mr. Kent is and what he's supposed to be important for. Put in one in the chat. If you know why Mr. Kent is supposed to be so important, put a one in the chat. Because right now, I don't see him having any importance talking this bullshit.
At the heart of that change mandate, 5 years after Ukraine.
I like the bow tie though. Don't get me wrong. I like the bow tie.
Because there cannot
donate through PayPal. Black Rose was
without a reform.
He is reading his history book.
Justice with integrity for all.
He reading the damn history book. 0, 0. Okay, nobody know who he is. Okay, well let me give you a little history lesson on who this dude is right quick. Let me give you a little history. Give you a little history lesson on. God damn, this nigga just turned to another page.
Principled promotion of the rule of
OMG.
Institutional integrity is so necessary to our strategy.
Hold on. I feel I gotta download this. I gotta download this so I can tell y'all exactly who he is.
It is also true for
exactly who testifying today. These people who testifying ain't even got no first-hand knowledge of nothing. Think about it. They don't even have first-hand knowledge of what the shit they're talking about.
I am grateful to all of the members of Congress and staffers, including many of you sitting here today, who have traveled to Ukraine over the past 5 years and appropriated billions of dollars of assistance.
Billions of dollars? Policy goals. Hold on, we got a homeless situation over here and they donate billions of dollars?
Energy, cyber, and information spheres.
And that bitch.
And they also empower state institutions and civil society to undertake systemic reforms and tackle corruption.
This nigga need to hurry the fuck up.
I believe all of us can be proud of our efforts in Ukraine over the past 5 years, even though much remains to be done.
What? All the prefacing. He came with a novel. He did come with a novel. Would be funny if they dressed up as clowns to make fun of this shit. That was like, but every time you make a sentence, somebody blow the horn.
Our transatlantic allies and partners.
You know Trump needs to be impeached. That would be funny as fuck. Only 22 likes. Come on, can do better than that. 22 likes. You know, it's some people out here don't like Donald Trump. So we got some haters up in here.
Here are the main 10 themes for my testimony. I outlined my experience.
Or if he has something that's important to say, he get to the point. He did. He would get straight to the point. Why the fuck are you trying to bore us? Look, this is what they want to do. They're trying to lure us to sleep, so we won't pay attention to the rest of the shit. Like, you know what, man? Turn this shit, so we'll just watch the highlights of the leak parts.
Sometimes firsthand, and sometimes
the people are faithful, devil donkeys. They do not know Jack or something. That's all anything, because there's nothing wrong or wrong doing by the president. There's nothing wrong doing with the president. Barack Obama done the same thing multiple times. Some of these people were on the phone call multiple times when Barack Obama did shit. And you mean to tell me didn't shit Barack Obama do? Didn't shit Bill Clinton do? Raise any suspicion? All that red line and tell your president I have more flexibility after the election.
Alleged criminal activities.
All that wasn't shit.
Institutional mechanisms. That is, to create and follow the rule of law.
What
that
the
means
MG.
If there are criminal nexuses.
No wonder don't nobody know the fuck he is.
U.S. law enforcement should pursue the case. If we think there's been a criminal act overseas that violates U.S. law, we have the institutional mechanisms to address that.
Don't we know all of this?
Department and FBI
we know the shit you're saying.
Or through treaty mechanisms, such as the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty.
This is bigger than
As a
Nino
general
Brown. This is bigger than Nino Brown. I have a whole list of
United
things.
States and countries
This kid not important. Them did to fill a large time frame to take the Americans' time of being hearing this was irrelevant. Exactly. What he's saying, what he's so it's so important. So the money, what did you hear or see, Clark Kent?
Pervasive and longstanding problem of corruption in Ukraine included exposure to a situation involving the energy company Burisma.
Let them ask them. Oh my
Primary
goodness.
concern of the U.S. government since 2014 was Burisma's owner, Mykola Zlochevsky.
Why is he talking about the gas company?
We had attempted to recover on Ukraine's behalf. In early 2015, I raised questions with the Deputy Prosecutor General about why the investigation of Mr. Zlochevsky had been terminated.
Oh, so he's talking about why Joe Biden, listen to this, he's talking about Joe Biden. He want to know why the investigation of Joe Biden was terminated. So you're throwing Joe Biden up under the bus because you're saying that it was something wrong with the Joe Biden and Hunter Biden thing, but you didn't investigate it. So that falls upon you because you didn't do the quid pro quo then. Hold on, rewind this one more time. Look at this, watch me say.
Prosecutor General about why the investigation of Mr. Zlochevsky had been terminated, based on our belief that prosecutors had accepted bribes to close the case.
Oh!
Later, I became aware that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma.
Oh!
And after that, in a briefing call with the National Security Staff of the Office of the Vice President in February of 2015, I raised my concern that Hunter Biden's status as a board member could create the perception of a conflict of interest.
Oh! Did he just snitch on Joe Biden? Did he just snitch on Joe Biden? It would be a conflict of interest. So if you thought it was a conflict of interest, why nobody took it up? Why nobody took it up then when Joe Biden was in the White House? It's been years. Didn't nobody report shit? Rewind it just a little bit more. This is the most important thing he done said.
It accepted bribes to close the case.
Oh, wait, this is the most important thing he said. Turn the book.
Prosecutor General on behalf, whose frozen assets abroad we had attempted to recover on Ukraine's behalf. In early 2015, I raised questions with the Deputy Prosecutor General about why the investigation of Mr. Zlochevsky had been terminated.
Joe Biden said it.
Our belief that prosecutors had accepted bribes to close the case.
They're accepting bribes. It wasn't for Donald Trump. They didn't accept no bribes for Donald Trump. Who did they accept the bribe from? Why this wasn't investigated that they were accepting bribes to terminate the case or the investigation? This should be a main focus.
Later, I became aware that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. Soon after that, in a briefing call with the National Security Staff of the Office of the Vice President in February of 2015, I raised my concern that Hunter Biden's status as a board member.
I don't know why they gonna cut it off.
Perception.
This is why I got on this channel. I don't know if they're gonna cut it off.
Let me be clear, however, I did not witness any effort by any U.S. official to shield Burisma from scrutiny. In fact, I and other U.S. officials consistently advocated reinstituting a scuttled investigation of Zlochevsky, Burisma's founder, as well as holding the corrupt prosecutors who closed the case to account. Over the course of 2018 and 2019, I became increasingly aware of an effort by Rudy Giuliani and others, including his associates Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, to run a campaign to smear Ambassador Yovanovitch and other officials at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. The chief agitators on the Ukrainian side of this effort were some of those same corrupt former prosecutors I had encountered, particularly Yuri Lutsenko and Viktor Shokin. They were now peddling false information in order to extract revenge against those who had exposed their misconduct, including U.S. diplomats, Ukrainian anti-corruption officials, and reform-minded civil society groups in Ukraine.
Oh, he's trying to say Ukraine's paying people off. That's what he's trying to say. Okay, now we get to the good shit.
During the late spring and summer of 2019, I became alarmed as those efforts bore fruit. They led to the ouster of Ambassador Yovanovitch and hampered U.S. efforts to establish rapport with the new Zelensky administration in Ukraine. In mid-August, it became clear to me that Giuliani's efforts to gin up politically motivated investigations were now infecting U.S. engagement with Ukraine, leveraging President Zelensky's desire for a White House meeting. There are and always have been.
Oh, you gonna speak for the Ukrainian president, huh?
Conditionality placed on our sovereign loan guarantees for Ukraine. Conditions include anti-corruption reforms, as well as meeting larger stability goals and social safety nets.
Get to the
The
question.
National Monetary Fund does the same thing. Congress and the executive branch work together to put conditionality on some security assistance in the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. Regarding my testimony today, I will do my best to answer your questions.
Okay, get to the question.
Issues, conversations, and documents that span a number of years. I may be limited by 3 considerations. First, the State Department has collected all materials in response to the September 27th subpoena that may contain facts relevant to my testimony.
Oh, shit.
No such documents or materials with me today. I will thus do my best to answer it as
now all the important questions he can say, I don't recall, I don't remember, because I don't have that evidence available. I don't have the paperwork available. This gives him a way out of incriminating himself, and he can say shit on Trump, you know what I'm saying, because that's not incriminating himself, or he can't, oh, this shit is crazy. He can't just go out and say, well, I did this and I did this. He got to say, Trump did this or Trump did that. Anything else will be violating my constitutional right.
Completely and truthfully as I can,
look at it.
The best of my recollection. Second, as this committee knows from deposition testimony, throughout this process, there have been concerns that questions may be asked about classified information.
See?
We have asked the State Department for guidance about classification concerns related to the public release of my deposition, and the State Department has—
He's not going to be able to answer certain questions.
I'm going to ask a question today that I believe may implicate classified information. I will respectfully decline to answer in this public forum.
I told you.
Third, there may be questions focusing on the identity of people in the intelligence community.
They're going to want to know about the whistleblower, and they're going to want to know about who gave you this information and things like that, where you get this information from, because you was not the first hand. You did not get this information firsthand. You were given this information. So what he about to say right now is, I'm not about to expose anybody who gave me any information. It's so fucking predictable.
These questions were redacted from my deposition's transcript. If such a question arises today, I will follow my counsel's advice and decline to answer. I would like to conclude my opening remarks with a conversation about some of my fellow public servants who have come under personal attacks. Ambassador Yovanovitch, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, and Dr. Hill, at least one of whom is going to appear before this body in the coming days.
Yovanovitch, Friday.
Were born abroad before their families or they themselves personally chose to immigrate to the United States.
Oh, they're fast. He's giving immigration
national security are the better for it. In this sense, they are the 21st century heirs of 2 giants of Kissinger's, the Yovanovitches and Vindmans fled Nazi and communist oppression to contribute to a stronger, more secure America.
Get to the point. I can fast forward a little bit. I'm glad I saved some time. Here we go.
Mr. Chairman, I'm appearing today.
Oh, hell no!
Provide my perspective on the events that are the subject of the committee's inquiry. I want to emphasize at the outset,
Ambassador Taylor was the one on the phone call.
Requested my testimony as part of impeachment proceedings. I am not here to take one side or the other, or to advocate for any particular outcome of these proceedings. My sole purpose is to provide facts as I know them about the incidents in question, as well as my views about the strategic importance of Ukraine to the United States.
Your views are not facts, idiot.
By way of background, it has been a privilege for me to serve our country and the American people for more than—
You go to Wild Head Girl again.
Started as a cadet at West Point, as you have mentioned, Mr. Chairman. It is an infantry officer for 6 years, including with the 151st Division in Vietnam. Then at the Department of Energy, then as in Afghanistan, 2009 to join the United States.
We don't want to hear this.
Nonpartisan, and have been appointed to my positions by every president from President Reagan to President Trump. Let me summarize my main points.
Trump didn't know your ass then.
Ukraine is a strategic partner of the United States, important for the security of our country, as well as Europe. Ukraine is on the front line in the conflict with a newly aggressive Russia. Second, even as we sit here today, the Russians are attacking Ukrainian soldiers in their own country and have been for the last 4 years.
Okay.
I saw this on the front line last week.
The fuck we got to do with that?
The day I was there, a Ukrainian soldier was killed and 4 were wounded. Third, the security assistance we provide—
I hope Jim Jordan get in.
Ukraine's defense and to the protection of the soldiers I met on the front line last
week. So look at Iran, John.
It demonstrates to Ukrainians and Russians that we are Ukraine's reliable strategic partner. It is clearly in our national interest to deter further Russian aggression. And finally, as the committee is aware,
Hurry up.
political campaign in the.
Yours wasn't long as his.
On May 28th of this year, I met with Secretary of State
I
Mike
want my shot.
Pompeo, who
Sorry.
asked me to rejoin the State Department
I want
and
my
return to Kyiv to lead our
you at the
efforts
front door?
in Ukraine. It was and is a critical time.
Hold on, right back.
I had served as
All right,
president
back.
of Ukraine from 2006 to 2009. Having been nominated by George W. Bush, and in the intervening 10 years had stayed.
Right back.
Across the responsibilities I have had in public service, Ukraine is the highlight. And so Secretary Pompeo's offer to return to the mission was compelling. Since I left Ukraine in 2009, the country had continued to turn toward the West. But in 2013, Vladimir Putin was so threatened by the prospect of Ukraine joining the European Union that he tried to bribe the Ukrainian president. This triggered mass protests in the winter of 2013 that drove that president to flee to Russia in February 2014, but not before his forces killed 100 Ukrainian protesters in central Kyiv. Days later, Mr. Putin invaded Crimea, holding a sham referendum at the point of Russian army rifles. The Russians absurdly claimed that 97% voted to join Russia. In early April, Putin sent his army and security forces into southeastern Ukraine to generate illegal armed formations and puppet governments in what we know as Donbass. You can see this on the map in the right-hand portion, in the eastern portion of the country. 14,000 Ukrainians have died in the war in Donbass, and more die each week. In July 2014, these Russian-led forces in Donbass shot down a civilian airliner en route from Amsterdam to Malaysia, killing all 298 people on board. We, the Europeans, and most of the West imposed economic sanctions and kicked the Russians out of the G8.
I'm back.
Beginning in 2014, we and NATO began to provide military assistance to Ukraine's armed forces in the form of training, advice, military equipment, and weapons.
That's what this is.
Run out of Kyiv, ruined. In response to the Russian invasion, the new Ukrainian authorities, with an amazing nearly war started. The nation
get to the damn question.
The security systems provide small unit training at an army base.
We already know all of this shit.
Defend freedom. During the 20 former ambassadors and other agencies to provide Russia. I also supported much stronger sanctions on Russia. I was pleased when the Trump administration began to go back to Kyiv. I wanted to say yes, but it was not an easy decision. The former ambassador,
hold on. Let me pause this right quick. Let me pause this right quick until they say something real. This what these dudes are known for right here. Let me give you a little history lesson on them. I'm gonna keep an eye on it off my phone. Let me give you a quick history lesson. Go to the damn channel.
We're waiting for this one.
These are fools testifying today.
Ambassador to Ukraine testifying today in the impeachment inquiry. Democrats are calling his testimony disturbing.
Hey, Neil, well, President Trump's acting Ukraine ambassador Bill Taylor is still meeting with lawmakers behind closed doors. The Washington Post is reporting that Taylor told lawmakers that the EU ambassador, Gordon Sondland, told him that President Trump wanted Ukraine to publicly announce an investigation into the Ukrainian energy company Burisma and also Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election before handing off military aid to the country. But sources tell Fox News that Taylor admitted he had no firsthand knowledge or evidence that Ukraine officials knew that military aid had been suspended at the time of the July 25th phone call between President Trump and Zelensky. That information would favor the White House defense that there was no quid pro quo if Ukraine didn't know about the delay.
Well, Democrats.
That's who these dudes is right here.
The idea of obstruction of Congress, the idea that they have not been able to get some of the witness testimony and some of the documents. So they could go back and say, this is one of those articles of impeachment. And if you go to Article 3, the 3 of the 5, which were considered by the House Judiciary Committee in 1974 regarding Richard Nixon, Article 3 dealt with obstruction of Congress. So Democrats feel like they are on the strongest impeachment turf with that. The other thing is this question of a quid pro quo, and this is where with Taylor, how much clarity was in that text message he was having with Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. Did he believe it, and did he have firsthand knowledge of what the president actually thought? That is the biggest question right now, and what we've been led to believe is that he did not have direct custody of this.
He didn't have direct custody. So they're talking to people who didn't have direct custody. Taylor was asking about a quid pro quo because he heard some shit on the text message. That's when dude like, hell on, this is no quid pro quo, and we need to get the fuck up off this phone. Gordon Sondland, that's the dude who Gordon Sondland was talking to.
Yeah, so George Kent is a career diplomat. He is currently the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Bureau, which makes him in charge of Ukraine policy. And since he joined the State Department in 1992, he's served Democratic and Republican administrations. And here are the two main takeaways from his testimony today. He was very explicit about calling out Rudy Giuliani. What he said.
Yeah, so George Kent is the dude who had the problem with Rudy Giuliani holding an investigation of things. So neither one of these had any kind of direct information. All these dudes was testifying on was hearsay.
Was Giuliani's, quote, full campaign full of lies against the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And unlike other diplomats who have testified, he expressed concerns about Hunter Biden, who was on the board of a notoriously corrupt Ukrainian company while his father, the vice president, was trying to get Ukrainian.
I wonder, and the Republicans, if they do get a chance to ask questions, they ought to grill him on that Hunter Biden because he spoke up about it. But the thing is, if he asks too much about it, all the Democrats and Schiff gonna do is shut him down. That's all they're gonna do is shut him down. If he asks, get too close to getting the truth out, Schiff gonna shut him down. Because remember, he got control over anything that can be said. So if it's something said that can be against the administration of Democrats, he's gonna shut it down.
Officials to tackle corruption. So both of those are at the core of this impeachment battle. For Democrats, Giuliani is the beginning of the story they want to tell, that the president withheld aid in order to benefit politically. And for Republicans, they want to talk about how Hunter Biden was on that board, right as Vice President Biden was working in Ukraine.
Oh, there we go. That's what we want to hear. Where was Vice President's son working at? That's what we want to hear. That's what we want to hear. That's what we want to hear. Oh, wrong. I don't. That's what we want to hear. What's up on? That's some shit. What about do that?
I'm waiting for this. The acting ambassador to Ukraine testifying today in the impeachment inquiry.
Oh yeah, right here. They're gonna do a commercial. They're gonna do a commercial. I'm not gonna do a commercial. Get up out of here, commercial.
Zelensky to the White House for a meeting with President Trump, which President Trump had promised in his congratulatory letter of May 29th. Ukrainians were clearly eager for the meeting to happen. But during my subsequent communications with Ambassadors Volker and Sondland, they relayed to me that the president wanted to hear from Zelensky before scheduling the meeting in the Oval Office. It was not clear to me what this meant. On June 27th, Ambassador Sondland told me during a phone conversation that President Zelensky needed to make clear to President Trump that he, President Zelensky, was not standing in the way of investigations. I sensed something odd when Ambassador Sondland told me on June 28th that he did not wish to include most of the regular interagency participants in a call planned with President Zelensky later that day. Ambassador Sondland, Ambassador Volker, Secretary Perry, and I were on this call, dialing in from different locations. However, Ambassador Sondland said he wanted to make sure no one was transcribing or monitoring as they added President Zelensky to the call. Also, before President Zelensky joined the call, Ambassador Volker separately told the U.S. participants that he, Ambassador Volker, planned to be explicit with President Zelensky in a one-on-one meeting in Toronto on July 2nd. In that meeting, Ambassador Volker planned to make clear what President Zelensky should do to get the White House meeting. I did not understand what this meant, but Ambassador Volker said he would relay that President Trump wanted to see rule of law, transparency, but also specifically cooperation on investigations to get to the bottom of things.
What's so wrong about that?
President Zelensky joined the call. The conversation was focused on energy policy and the war in Donbass. President Zelensky also said he looked forward to the White House visit President Trump had offered in his May 29th letter. By mid-July, it was becoming clear to me that the meeting President Zelensky wanted was conditioned on the investigations
It came clear to you.
and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 U.S. elections. It was also clear that this condition was driven by the irregular policy channel I had come to understand was guided by Mr. Giuliani. In a regular NSC secure video conference call on July 18th, I heard a staff person from the office.
Elias blinks a lot. You need some coffee?
Security
What's wrong with the dude's eyes in the back?
could not say
Oh, boy, right here?
for the end of an
The redhead?
meeting, a voice on
His
the
eyes are black.
was off screen.
And look how
said that she
black
was
his
from
eyes
OMB,
is.
And her boss had instructed her not to
The
approve
devil.
any
Look how black his
additional
eyes
spending on
is.
security assistance for Ukraine until further notice. I and others sat.
That shit is creepy.
Ukrainians were fighting Russians and counted on not only the training and weapons, but also the assurance.
He about to
of
nod
US
off any
support.
second. Go straight to sleep.
All that the OMB staff person said was that the directive had
Kill the
come from the
messenger.
president to the chief of staff
Hey, wait.
to OMB.
That boy is
In
blinking.
an instant, I realized that one of the key pillars of our strong support for Ukraine was threatened. The irregular policy
Yeah, every
channel
time
was
you look
running
up, you blink.
contrary
Look, blank,
to
blank.
the goals of
Blink,
long-standing
blink.
U.S. policy. There followed a series of NSC-led interagency meetings, starting at the staff level and quickly reaching the level of cabinet secretaries. At every meeting, the unanimous conclusion.
Oh, if he getting
was that
paid for his
security
blink, I'll be
systems
up in
should
there
resumed
sleep. I'll be
the
blinking
whole
like
time.
hell.
At one point, the Defense Department was asked to perform an analysis of the effectiveness of the assistance. Within a day, the Defense Department came back with the determination that the assistance was effective and should be.
Man, can
resumed.
y'all get on with the damn, oh my
understanding
God.
was that the secretaries of
With the
Defense
interviewing, with the
CIA
questioning.
Director and the National Security Advisor sought a joint meeting with the president to convince him to release the hold, but such a meeting was hard to schedule and the hold lasted well into September. On July 9th,
Oh, shit.
in a phone call with then Senior Director for European and Russian
Red
Affairs,
had
Fiona
bad
Hill,
houses.
and Director of
Evil
European
because they
Affairs,
lied.
Lieutenant Colonel
Satan.
Alex Vindman. at
You got the
NSC.
red hair, but damn sure.
Tried to assure me that they were not aware of any official change in U.S. policy towards Ukraine, OMB's announcement notwithstanding. They did confirm that the hold on security assistance for Ukraine came from Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, who maintained
Oh,
a
man.
skeptical view of Ukraine.
Get
In
on,
the same
hold on
July
one more
19th
time.
phone call, they gave me an account
This is
of
horrible.
a July 10th meeting with
This is
Ukrainian
horrible.
and American
I'll
officials
get back to
at
this
the
in a
White
minute.
House.
Get the
Told
question.
me
When they get that question, that is horrible right there. That is absolutely horrible. That's absolutely horrible.
In his testimony today, he was very explicit about calling out Rudy Giuliani. What he said was Giuliani's quote for this impeachment battle. For Democrats, Giuliani is the beginning of Ukraine. Kemp's words are much more pointed, and he went further in his language than most people. And he's really angry about one incident, and that is the ouster of former Ukrainian ambassador Marie Yovanovitch.
He is only one, Matt, and really one incident. So the only reason why the dude on here talking right now is because of Maria Yovanovitch. Has nothing to do with his policies, has nothing to do with the phone calls. He hated on Donald Trump because he fired Maria Yovanovitch.
Now, just a reminder, Yovanovitch was the Trump administration's ambassador to Ukraine, spent 33 years as a foreign service officer, nominated by both Democratic and Republican administrations. She lost her job after Rudy Giuliani convinced the president that she was anti-Trump. And this is what Kent said about that campaign that Giuliani led. He said Giuliani at that point had been carrying on a campaign for several months full of lies and incorrect information on Ambassador Yovanovitch. His assertions and allegations when against former Ambassador Yovanovitch were without basis, untrue, period. But Absolutely. This is a point where Hunter Biden was on the board of a company called Burisma.
Look at he been giving up on Hunter Biden. This is why Hunter Biden should be investigated. The exact reason why. He been break it down.
Absolutely. This is a point where Hunter Biden was on the board of a company called Burisma. It's a Ukrainian oil and gas company that is notoriously corrupt. Both U.S. and British officials were actually wanting to investigate Burisma, and this was exactly as Vice President Biden was leading U.S. policy in Ukraine and trying to root out corruption. So let's look at what Kent said about this. I raised my concerns that I'd heard that Hunter Biden was on the board of a Ukrainian gas company that could create the perception of a conflict of interest.
But why nobody made no big deal out of that shit? Why nobody made no big deal out of it? You raised concerns, and you didn't raise concerns about Donald Trump. The only concerns you raised was when he fired Maria Yakovich. You didn't have no concerns over the
The message that I recall hearing back was that the vice president's son, Beau, was dying of cancer. This was in 2015, and that there was no further bandwidth to deal with family-related issues at that time. So I talked to a couple of officials who used to work for Vice President Biden at this time, and they are admittedly unsure whether that particular conversation took place. But here's their larger point.
Whoa, so they say he lied.
They say that Vice President Biden's push to tackle corruption would have increased the exposure of Burisma, where his son was on the board, rather than decrease or somehow shield the exposure to Burisma. And so what they argue is that even if there were some optics problems, the fact is that it didn't affect U.S. policy, it did not affect Vice President Biden's policy to try and get Ukraine to crack down on corruption.
Clearing him of wrongdoing in the July phone call. In multiple tweets, the president said the report is made up.
Join me now. Jeff is a White House correspondent.
Hold on.
The House Intelligence Committee. From State Department official George Kent, ahead of his public testimony in the impeachment inquiry next week. Kent is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State responsible for Eurasian and European affairs. In emails given to Congress early last month, Kent expressed concerns about the campaign to discredit Marie Yovanovitch. She is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine who is set to testify publicly next Friday. In his testimony, Kent accused President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, of carrying out a campaign of lies about former Ambassador Yovanovitch. Yovanovitch was recalled from her post as ambassador after allies of the president reportedly said she was undermining efforts by Giuliani to persuade Kiev to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden. CBS News correspondent Nicole Killian reports from Capitol Hill.
House committees.
So all he basically going to do.
POTUS wanted nothing less than President Zelensky to go to microphone and say investigations Biden and Clinton. He added, I do not believe the U.S. should ask other countries to engage in politically associated investigations and prosecutions. Kent is one of 3 witnesses scheduled to testify publicly next week.
And to the former U.S. envoy to
he's still an
appearance on Capitol Hill. We showed you first Congressman Jim Jordan. Moments ago, we caught the tail end of Intel Chief Adam Schiff, and there is more. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live with details. That interview still happening with the ambassador?
Yes, they are. Harris, good afternoon to you. And we've obtained encrypted text messages that involve some of the key players on Ukraine. One of them being Kurt Volker, who was at the time the U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, William Taylor, temporary ambassador for the U.S. in Ukraine, and Gordon Sondland, the United States ambassador to the European Union. The exchange started on September 9th when the Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson revealed the existence of a whistleblower related to Ukraine. These 3 created a secure text exchange, which shows Taylor expressing concern to his colleagues. Bill Taylor, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. Gordon Sondland, Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. The president's trying to evaluate whether Ukraine is truly going to adopt the transparency and reforms that President Zelensky promised during the campaign. I suggest we stop the back and forth by text. So then the discussion was taken offline, and lawmakers are likely learning more about this exchange right now with Volker behind closed doors here on Capitol Hill. There's also a reference to concerns about an interview being given, but the context of that is unclear. Bill Taylor, The nightmare is they give us the interview and don't get the security clearance. The Russians love it, and I quit. Counting on you to be right about this interview, Gordon. Gordon Sunland. Bill, I never said I was right. I said we are where we are and believe we have identified the best pathway forward. Let's hope it works. Fox News has reached out to all three players, Taylor, Sunland, and Volker. Volker's still behind closed doors here on Capitol Hill, and we will update this breaking story should we get any more context or comment from them. Harris?
So that's what you got to look out for in this case. That's what these dudes up in here for. They don't have any first-hand knowledge. All they have is hearsay. Hearsay. So they brought these people on for just plain hearsay. Nothing more, nothing less, just plain hearsay. Oops.
First person cable to Secretary Pompeo.
He's still just talking.
Relaying my concerns. I wrote and transmitted such a cable on August 29th, describing the folly I saw in withholding military aid to Ukraine at a time when hostilities were still active in the East and when Russia was watching closely to gauge the level of American support for the Ukrainian government. The Russians, as I said in my deposition, would love to see the humiliation of President Zelensky at the hands
I don't even know how to activate no donate button on here.
That I could not and would not defend such a
policy. I don't think this.
Although I received no specific response, I heard that soon thereafter, the Secretary carried the cable with him to a meeting at the White House focused on security assistance for Ukraine. The same day that I sent my cable to the Secretary, Mr. Yermak.
This part right here, why do the witness get a goddamn opening statement? Isn't that supposed to be for the lawyers?
The hold that the White House had placed on assistance had just been made public that day in a Politico story. At that point, I was embarrassed that I could give him no explanation for why it was withheld. It had still not occurred to me that the hold on security assistance could be related to the investigations.
You have to have some real patience to watch this shit.
On September 1st, just 3 days after I called to Secretary Pompeo, President Zelensky met Vice President Pence at a bilateral meeting in Warsaw.
If this shit don't get if they don't get asking questions,
but at the last minute had canceled because of Hurricane Dorian. Just hours before the Pence-Zelensky meeting, I contacted Mr. Donahue to let him know that the delay of U.S. assistance was an all-or-nothing proposition in the sense that if the White House did not lift the hold prior to the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, the gentleman knows.
Jim Jordan had a little bit of time.
I do not know the identity of the whistleblower, and I'm determined to make sure that identity is protected. But as I said to Mr. Conaway, you will have an opportunity after the witnesses testify to make a motion to subpoena any witness and compel a vote. And with that, I now recognize the witnesses. Before I do, I want to just emphasize the microphones are sensitive, so please speak directly into them.
All that money the government got, y'all got some sensitive ass microphones. Ain't that a bitch?
Without objection, your written statements will be made part of the record. And with that, Deputy Assistant Secretary Kent, you are recognized for your opening statement. Ambassador Taylor, you are recognized immediately.
Good morning. My name is George Kent, and I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. I have served proudly as a nonpartisan career
media and partisan bureaucrat, President Trump. The Democrats engaged in a last-ditch effort to convince the American people that President Trump is a Russian agent. That hearing was the pitiful finale of a 3-year-long operation by the Democrats, the corrupt media, and partisan bureaucrats to overturn the results of the 2016 election. After the spectacular implosion of their Russia hoax on July 24th, in which they spent years denouncing any Republican who ever shook hands with a Russian. On July 25th, they turned on a dime and now claim the real malfeasance is Republicans' dealings with
Snowden was a whistleblower and Biden ain't nobody
protecting him. Exactly. To simply forget about Democrats on this committee, falsely claiming they had more than circumstantial evidence of collusion between President Trump and Russians. We should forget about them reading fabrications of Trump-Russia collusion from the Steele dossier into the congressional record. We should also forget about them trying to obtain nude pictures of Trump
from Russian
I have to do something on him.
who pretended to be Ukrainian officials. We should forget about them leaking a false story to CNN while he was still testifying to our committee, claiming that Donald Trump Jr. was colluding with WikiLeaks.
Yeah, remember that?
Forget about countless other deceptions, large and small, that make them the last people on earth with the credibility to hurl more preposterous accusations at their political opponents. And yet now, here we are. We're supposed to take these people at face value when they trot out a new batch of allegations. But anyone familiar with the Democrats' scorched earth war against President Trump would not be surprised to see all the typical signs that this is a carefully orchestrated media smear campaign. For example, after vowing publicly that impeachment requires bipartisan support,
everybody got a red hand on the right-hand side
without the backing of a single Republican. The witnesses deemed suitable for television by the Democrats were put through a closed-door audition process and a cult-like atmosphere in the basement of the Capitol, where Democrats conducted secret depositions, released a flood of misleading and one-sided leaks, and later selectively released transcripts in a highly staged manner. Violating their own guidelines, Democrats repeatedly redacted from the transcripts the name of Alexander Chalupa, a contractor for the Democratic National Committee, who worked with Ukrainian officials to collect dirt on the Trump campaign, which she provided to the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. The Democrats rejected most of the Republicans' witness requests, resulting in a horrifically one-sided process where the crucial witnesses are denied a platform if their testimony does not support the Democrats' absurd accusations.
Exactly.
Notably, they are trying to impeach the president for inquiring about Hunter Biden's activities. Yet they refuse our request to hear from Biden himself. The whistleblower was acknowledged to have a bias against President Trump, and his attorney touted a coup against the president and called for his impeachment just weeks after the election.
Days after the election.
At a prior hearing, Democrats on this committee read out a purely fictitious rendition of the president's phone call with President Zelensky.
Adam Schiff.
They clearly found the real conversation to be insufficient for their impeachment narrative, so they just made up a new one. And most egregiously, the staff of the Democrats on this committee had direct discussions with the whistleblower before his or her complaint was submitted to the Inspector General. Republicans can't get a full account of these contacts because Democrats broke their promise to have the whistleblower testify to this committee. Democrat members hid these contacts from Republicans and then lied about them to the American people on national television. I've noted before, the Democrats have a long habit of accusing Republicans of offenses.
After this long ass opening statements, I don't think they won't even answer no damn questions. They don't answer them all.
For years, they accused the Trump campaign of colluding with Russia when they themselves were colluding with Russia by funding and spreading the Steele dossier, which relied on Russian sources. And now they accuse President Trump of malfeasance in Ukraine when they themselves are culpable. The Democrats cooperated in Ukrainian election meddling, and they defend Hunter Biden's securing of a lavishly paid position with a corrupt Ukrainian company, all while his father served as vice president. Despite this hypocrisy, the Democrats are advancing their impeachment sham. But we should not hold any hearings at all until we get answers to three crucial questions the Democrats are determined to avoid asking.
Three.
First, what is the full extent of the Democrats' prior coordination with the whistleblower? And who else did the whistleblower coordinate this effort with? Second, what is the full extent of Ukraine's election meddling against the Trump campaign? And third, why did Burisma hire Hunter Biden? And what did he do for them? And did his position affect any U.S. government actions under the Obama administration?
That should be some good ass questions.
These questions will remain outstanding because Republicans were denied the right to call witnesses that know these answers. What we will witness today is a televised theatrical performance staged by the Democrats. Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Kent, I'd like to welcome you here. I'd like to congratulate you for passing the Democrat Star Chamber auditions held for the last weeks in the basement of the Capitol. It seems you agreed, witting or unwittingly, to participate in a drama. But the main performance, the Russia hoax, has ended, and you've been cast in the low-rent Ukrainian sequel.
Low rent, call them low budget.
By noting the immense damage a politicized bureaucracy has done to Americans' faith in government, though executive branch employees are charged with implementing the policies set by our president, who is elected and responsible to the American people. Elements of the civil service have decided that they, not the president, are really in charge. Thus, as we'll learn in these hearings, after expressing skepticism of foreign aid and concern about foreign corruption on the campaign trail, President Trump outraged the bureaucracy by acting skeptically about foreign aid and expressing concerns about foreign corruption. Officials' alarm at the president's actions was typically based on second-hand, third-hand, and even fourth-hand rumors and innuendo. They believed it was an outrage for the president to fire an ambassador, even though the investigations were played into domestic U.S. politics. I sought to confirm through Mr. Daniluk that President Zelensky was not planning to interview to the media, while Mr. Daniluk initially confirmed
what more can you say?
I noticed during a meeting on the morning of September 13th at President Zelensky's office that Mr. Yermak looked uncomfortable.
I don't know who the hell is in charge.
Question. Again, I asked Mr. Daniluk to confirm that there would be no CNN interview, which he did. On September 25th, at the UN General Assembly session in New York City, President Trump—
I don't have no more videos to show this.
Face.
I done show this video. I done show another video describing shit. I done show another clip from some shit. Another news stuff. I done showed some stuff earlier on here.
July 25th,
and they still talk.
President Zelensky, in which he mentioned Vice President Biden. I had come to understand well before then.
You don't need no water or nothing. This motherfucker don't need no water or nothing.
And Sondland used to mean
he must be long. Oh, there you go. I'm about to say he got some water. He's long-winded.
Investigations of Burisma and the Bidens.
You can tell this motherfucker's mouth was dry. It had to be dry. He was talking like his mouth was dry.
A member of my staff told me of events that occurred on July 26th. While Ambassador Volker and I visited the front, this member of my staff—
his mouth getting dry again. You have to drink some water again.
Ambassador Sondland met with Mr. Yermak.
Every time he finishes his
staff at a restaurant, Ambassador Sondland called President Trump and told him of his meetings in Kyiv. A member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump that the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought.
You're not supposed to speak that long. He's about to lose me.
Responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden.
I don't know what else to do to kill time.
At the time I gave my deposition on October 22nd, I was not aware of this information.
Oh, yeah, you do.
I'm including it here for completeness. As the committee knows, I reported this information through counsel to the State Department's legal advisor, as well as to counsel for both the majority and the minority of this committee.
To watch Days of Our Lives. Days of Our Lives? You skip college to watch Days of Our Lives?
Mr. Chairman, I recognize that this is rather a lengthy recitation of the events of the past few months, told from my vantage point in Kyiv. But I also recognize.
I want to see what kind of questions is the Democrats going to ask. The Democrats going to ask us for. That's what I want to hear. They got jugs of water next to them. We got 2 small waters and 1 big ass water.
My best recollection, as well as a review of my personal notes. Let me return to the points I made at the outset.
Oh, hell no.
Ukraine is important to the security of the United States. The largest country in Europe by landmass, Ukraine is a young democracy struggling to join Europe
and ally itself with the United States.
Oh my God.
It has been violently attacked by Russia, which continues its armed aggression against Ukraine to this day. If we believe in the principle of the sovereignty of nations, on which our security and the security of our friends and allies depends, if we believe that nations get to decide on their own economic, political, and security alliances, we must support Ukraine in its fight against its bullying neighbor. Russian aggression cannot stand. Republican and Democratic administrations over 3 decades have been generous with assistance.
That was a perfect time for him to end it right there.
And political support. With overwhelming bipartisan majorities, Congress has imposed harsh sanctions on Russia for invading and occupying Ukraine. Mr. Chairman, there are 2 Ukraine stories today. The first is the one we're discussing this morning that you have been hearing about for the past 2 weeks. It's a rancorous story about whistleblowers, Mr. Giuliani, side channels, quid pro quo.
I don't know about y'all, but I'm damn near about
elections.
ready to turn this motherfucker off and wait till they get the question in about 30 minutes to an hour. I ain't got time to keep on listening to Mr. Taylor.
Positive, bipartisan one. In this second story, Ukraine is the subject. This one is about young people in a young nation struggling to break free of its past, hopeful that their new government will finally usher in a new Ukraine, proud of its independence from Russia, eager to join Western institutions and enjoy a more secure and prosperous
So
life.
we're losing all this money,
This story
all
describes
these
a nation
soldiers,
developing an
and
inclusive,
doing all these
democratic
laws
nationalism,
because these
not
motherfuckers
unlike
want to
what
live a
we
different
in
life.
America, in our best moments, feel about our diverse country. Less concerned about what language we speak, what religion, if any, we practice, where our parents and grandparents came from, more concerned about building a new country.
A new country?
I'm looking forward to your questions.
Okay, cool.
Thank you both for your testimony.
God
and I
damn.
thank you as myself and Majority Counsel
Woo, about time.
questions. Mr. Chairman, Master Taylor, I'd like to begin by following up on something that you have disclosed today and you disclosed earlier to both majority and minority, but it is some new information for the committee. You said in your testimony that one of your staff was present with Ambassador Sondland on the day after the July 25th phone call. Is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And as your staff related the event to you, your staff member could overhear Mr. Sondland on the phone, we could overhear the president on the phone with Mr. Sondland. Is that right?
That's correct.
So the president must have been speaking loud enough on the phone. This was a cell phone, I take it?
It was a cell phone.
The president must have been speaking loud enough for your staff member to be able to overhear this?
It was.
And what your staff member could overhear was President Trump asking Ambassador Sondland about, quote, the investigations. Is that right?
That's correct.
Third-hand
You testified
information.
also that you had come to understand that the term investigations was a term that Ambassador Sondland, as well as Volker, used to mean matters related to the 2016 elections and to the investigations of Burisma and the Bidens. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
So your staff member overhears the president asking about the investigations, meaning Burisma and the Bidens in 2016. And Ambassador Sondland told President Trump that the Ukrainians were ready to move forward?
He did.
And I think you said that after the call, when your staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought of Ukraine, his response was that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden. Is that right?
And Burisma, yes, sir.
That's an opinion.
And I take it the import of that is he cares more about that than he does about Ukraine.
Yes, sir.
Is he supposed to give a fuck about Ukraine? Think about it. He's the president of America, not the fucking world.
During your testimony, Ambassador Taylor, you also said that more Ukrainians would undoubtedly die without U.S. assistance. Why is that?
Mr. Chairman, the security assistance that we provide, it takes many forms. One of the components of that assistance is counter battery radar. Another component are sniper weapons. These weapons and this assistance it allows the Ukrainian military to deter further incursions by the Russians against Ukrainian territory.
What the fuck?
If that further incursion, further aggression were to take place, more Ukrainians would die. So it is a deterrent effect that these weapons provide. It's also the ability, it gives the Ukrainians the
These
ability
questions was already
to
set up, because how you ask him one question and he's disprepared to answer this one question.
To the
He done held a whole goddamn summary on one question. He was already prepared for this question.
A way that would reduce the number of Ukrainians who would die.
He ain't struggling, he ain't thinking of nothing.
If the provision of U.S. military assistance would save Ukrainian lives, that any delay in that assistance may also cost Ukrainian lives. Is that true?
No.
Chairman, of course, it's hard to draw any direct lines between any particular element of security assistance and any particular death on the battlefield. But it is certainly true that that assistance had enabled Ukrainian armed forces to be effective and deter and to be able to take care.
No, what he was asking was, y'all always saying it's American security at risk. What he's saying is, if it was a delay in there, was it still going to be some Americans that died? You can answer that question, because the answer would have been no. So you have to create a whole nother answer to a whole nother set of circumstances. Now you're talking about they need the weapons to save, to prepare and save themselves. He didn't ask you about that. He asked me what kind of danger we're in for. Think about that question.
Measures to the attacks that the Russians had.
And I think you said that a Ukrainian soldier lost their life while you were visiting Donbass.
We keep very careful track of the casualties, and I noticed on the next day the information that we got that one was killed, four soldiers were wounded on that day.
And indeed, Ukrainians lose their lives every week.
So do Americans. So do Americans.
I think you also testified that Russia was watching closely to gauge the level of American support for the Ukrainian government. Why is that significant?
This is significant, Mr. Chairman, because the Ukrainians, in particular under this new administration, are eager to end this war. And they are eager to end it in a way that the Russians leave their territory. These negotiations, like all negotiations, are difficult. Ukrainians would like to be able to negotiate from a position of strength, or at least more strength than they now have. Part of that strength, part of the ability of the Ukrainians to negotiate against the Russians, with the Russians for an end to the war in Donbass, depends on the United States and other.
So what you're saying is the war between the Ukrainians and the Russians is only effective for the Ukrainians if we are involved. So you saying they're using us as a security blanket so they won't have to fight the Russians by themselves? Well, if they're using us, shouldn't they pay us? But they're using us and we're still paying them? That don't make no sense.
International support. If we withdraw or suspend or threaten to withdraw our security systems, that's a message to the Ukrainians, but it's at least as important, as your question indicates, Mr. Chairman, to the Russians, who are looking for any sign of weakness or any sign that we are withdrawing our support for Ukraine.
And so
the Russians can do what they've been wanting to do. So in other words, we're only there to protect the Ukrainians from getting attacked from Russia?
When the Ukrainians learned of the suspension of the military aid, either privately or when others learned publicly, the Russians would be learning also. And they would take that as a lack of robust U.S. support for Ukraine.
Well, you motherfuckers shouldn't have leaked all the information. If y'all wasn't on here talking about it 24/7 about how the president didn't give them the money to defend themselves, the Russians wouldn't even fucking know. So you just answered your own question. Yes, the Ukrainians knew. I mean, the Russians knew. That's because y'all leaked it.
Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
And that would weaken Ukraine in negotiating an end to the war in Donbass.
It would.
People watching, I'm sure, are interested in how military assistance and diplomatic support for Ukraine affects Ukraine, but even more so interested in how does this affect our national security?
Exactly.
Now,
by the time you answered a good question, but of course he's not going to answer it. I bet you. How does it affect our national security? Rewind it one more time and watch how you avoid the question.
Even more so interested in how does this affect our national security? Now, I think you said that if we believe in a principle of sovereignty of nations where countries get to determine their own economic, political, and security alliances, we have to support Ukraine in its fight. That the kind of aggression we see by Russia can't stand. How is it important to American national security that we provide for a robust defense of Ukraine's sovereignty?
Mr. Chairman, as my colleague, Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent described, we have a national security policy, a national defense policy that identifies Russia and China as adversaries. The Russians are violating all of the rules, treaties, understandings that they committed to that actually kept the peace in Europe for nearly 70 years. Until they invaded Ukraine in 2014, they had abided by sovereignty of nations, of inviolability of borders. That rule of law, that order that kept the peace in Europe and allowed for prosperity as well as peace in Europe was violated by the Russians.
This is our money being spent, huh?
We
Right?
don't push back.
This is our money being spent
on those violations, then that will continue. And that, Mr. Chairman, affects us. It affects the world that we live in.
That didn't say nothing about our security. I told you he wasn't going to answer the question.
And that our children will grow up in, and our grandchildren. This affects the kind of world that we want to see abroad. So that affects our national interest very directly. Ukraine is on the front line of that conflict.
What about our national security, idiot? The question he asked.
Thank you both for your decades of service to the country, and now recognize Mr. Goldman for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Taylor, on the heels of you discussing the importance of the security assistance to Ukraine, I want to go to the end of the timeline where you learned that that security assistance was conditioned on Ukraine announcing the investigations that the president wanted. And in particular, on September 9th of this year, you texted Ambassador Sondland and Volker, and the text message should be on the screen in front of you. And if you could read what you wrote.
As I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign.
What did you mean when you said you thought it was crazy?
Ms. Goldman, I meant that because of the importance of security assistance that we had just described and had a conversation with the chairman, because that was so important, that security assistance was so important for Ukraine as well as our own national interest, to withhold that assistance for no good reason other than help with a political campaign made no sense. It was
this is like a Hitchcock book. I mean, a fucking Stephen King book.
It was illogical. It could not be explained. It was crazy.
When you say all of what we were trying to do, what do you mean by we?
I mean that the United States was trying to support Ukraine as a frontline state.
Hold on, who the fuck ain't we part of the United States? I didn't try to support shit. When you saying we, speak for your damn self. It wasn't we as the United States, it was y'all as in the Democrats.
Against Russian attack. And again, the whole notion of a rules-based order was being threatened by the Russians in Ukraine. So our security assistance was designed to support Ukraine. That's it. And it was not just the United States. It was all of our allies.
So we was responsible for protecting all our allies. That's why when Donald Trump say they should be protecting people more, they should be fighting more, they should be giving more people money. That's why he's exactly right, because of shit like this. You're saying that America is responsible for protecting the Kurds against the Russian and protecting any other place that's against an ally from any type of harm from Iraq or the Taliban or anybody you say that's a threat to us. Think about this shit.
When you reference help with a political campaign in this text message, what did you mean?
I meant that the investigation of Burisma and the Bidens was clearly identified by Mr. Giuliani in public for months.
And you the same person who said it was something suspicious in it? So why is you talking about Giuliani going off and mentioning something that you should have mentioned a long time ago if you thought it was wrong?
As a way to get information on the two Bidens.
And that investigation at the very least was mentioned by President Trump in the July 25th phone call with President Zelensky. Is that right?
As we now know, yes. Yes, on September 25th, that transcript was released.
Ambassador Taylor, in your decades of military service and diplomatic service representing the United States around the world, have you ever seen another example of foreign aid conditioned on the personal or political interests of the President of the United States?
Don't nobody else give out foreign aid like us.
No, Mr. Goldman, I've not.
Mr. Kent, that vital military assistance that was not the only thing that President Trump was withholding from Ukraine. What else was contingent on Ukraine initiating these investigations?
Well, as we've talked earlier today, the possibility of a White House meeting was being held contingent to an announcement.
How important to President Zelensky was a White House meeting?
New leaders, particularly countries that are trying to have good footing in the international arena, see a meeting with the U.S. President in the Oval Office at the White House as the ultimate sign of endorsement and support from the United States.
Well, if that was the case, if everybody thinks the same thing, what's wrong with the Ukrainian president thinking like everybody else? If I get in with the United States, it shows some type of power. It shows some type of alliance. It's a good photo op for me and my country. So he wanting to see the president was probably more important than the president wanting to see him.
President Zelensky was a relatively new president, is that right?
That's correct. He was elected on April 21st, and his government was formed after parliamentary elections in July.
Would a White House meeting for President Zelensky boost his legitimacy as a new president in Ukraine?
Yes.
It would primarily boost his leverage to negotiate with Vladimir Putin about the Russian occupation of 7% of Ukrainian territory.
Mr. Kent, is pressuring Ukraine to conduct what I believe you've called political investigations a part of U.S. foreign policy to promote the rule of law in Ukraine and around the world?
It is not.
Is it in the national interest of the United States?
In my opinion, it is not.
Why not?
Because our policies, particularly in promoting the rule of law, are designed to help countries, and in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, that is overcoming the legacy of communism. In the communist system, in particular, the Prosecutor General Office was used to
they speak is too damn long and well thought out.
The rule of law. So
every time you ask one damn question, they take 2 minutes to answer.
Aspirations to join the Western community of nations and live lives of dignity, helping them have the rule of law with strong institutions is the purpose.
It's illegal. That's why he's a lawyer.
So in other words, it is a purpose of our foreign policy to encourage foreign nations to refrain from conducting political investigations. Is that right?
Correct. And in fact, as a matter of policy, not of programming, we oftentimes raise our concerns, usually in private, with countries that we feel are engaged in selective political prosecution and persecution of their opponents.
Ambassador Taylor, now that we've established that you ultimately did understand that President Trump was withholding the security assistance and a White House meeting from Ukraine until they announced these investigations to benefit his re-election campaign, let's go back a little bit in time to when you first learned about this conditionality. And on September 1st, so a little more than a week before that text we just read, you sent another text to Ambassadors Sondland and Volker, which should also be on the screen in front of you. And if you could read what you wrote to them.
Are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations?
And Ambassador Sondland responded,
call me.
Now, what information had you learned that prompted you to write this text message?
You don't know.
I had learned that in Warsaw, after the meeting Vice President Pence had with President Zelensky, Ambassador Sondland had meetings there and had described to Mr. Yermak, the assistant to President Zelensky, that
you know what?
Security assistance.
I'm gonna have to edit this shit because this shit is too long. This shit is too long and boring. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna find another skit to make, and we're gonna watch this shit later on, and we're gonna talk about it on the main channel because I don't want to watch all these dead parts, and I know y'all don't want to watch them either. So I'm gonna take all the good parts out, and we're gonna watch them on my main channel later. Yo, we're gonna cut this shit off, but they just gonna talk in a gang. I'm gonna mix it up for y'all. I'm gonna mix it up and make a video and have a trivia quiz and all that for y'all later on tonight. But this is getting out of hand.
You said previously that you were
getting out of hand
to learn this.
See y'all later tonight when I go live, y'all. I will see y'all later tonight when I go live.
It's one thing to
get out of trouble. We ain't learned nothing. We watched it for an hour. We still ain't learned nothing they talked about. So this is
another thing.
I'll be back with y'all later on tonight.
To leverage
I can't watch this.
Security assistance to a